The midday sun scorched the streets of Ouagadougou. Dust swirled with every passing motorcycle, mixing with the smell of roasted corn and sweat. Vendors shouted prices. Children darted between cars, life rushed forward. Yet from a quiet corner came a weak cough, a sound no one noticed, except one man. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's convoy slowed at the crowded intersection. He was about to signal his driver forward when his eyes caught a figure by the roadside. An old man, frail and thin, sat on the hot pavement with a tin bowl before him. His clothes were torn, his hair matted with dust, and his eyes clouded white, stared into nothingness. The crowd flowed past him like water around a stone. Some muttered cruel words. "Why doesn't he just die already?" a passerby hissed. Others ignored him as if he were invisible. The old man's trembling hand stretched forward, the empty bowl shaking. His voice cracked like dry wood. "Please, just a little food, even cold rice." Ibrahim's chest tightened. This was not just a beggar. This was someone's father, someone's teacher, someone forgotten. The president stepped out of his car. The sudden sight made the crowd freeze. Phones lifted, whispers spread. Guards moved nervously, but Ibrahim waved them back. He knelt beside the old man, dust staining his uniform. The old man tilted his head, confused. Who are you?" he asked softly. Ibrahim reached out gently, holding the man's calloused hand. "I am your son today, Ibrahim," whispered his voice steady. "And no father should beg in the streets." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. A few eyes glistened with tears. For the first time, the old man smiled faintly, though his lips trembled. Before we continue with this heartbreaking story, I'd love to know, where are you watching this video from, and what time is it there? Comment below. I can't wait to read your answers. The old man's hand trembled in Ibrahim's grasp. His lips quivered, struggling to form words that seemed heavier than stone. "I was once a teacher," he whispered. His voice was thin, but it carried years of dignity, now buried under dust and hunger. Children filled my classroom every morning. Their voices, their laughter, their dreams. I taught them to read, to write, to hope. The crowd shifted uneasily. None of them had expected such words from a beggar on the street. But life, the old man continued his tone. Breaking life is cruel. I began to lose my sight. At first, just shadows. Then the letters on the blackboard blurred. The chalk in my hand felt heavier each day. One morning I stood before my students, and I could not even see the alphabet I was writing. That was the day everything ended. He paused, his breathing shallow. His eyes clouded white, unseeing, tilted toward the sky. They replaced me with another teacher. My salary stopped. My wife, she fell sick, and I could not provide. She passed away one night while I sat helpless in the dark. My son left the house ashamed of me. My daughter, she married and never looked back. I was left alone, alone with darkness. A silence spread across the street. The market's noise seemed to fade, replaced by the weight of his words. The old man clenched his fists, his voice dropping into a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. Years ago, I taught children how to write the letter A. Today, I beg strangers for cold rice. The sentence hit Ibrahim like a blade. His chest tightened. He felt the words echo inside him, raw and merciless. He remembered the dusty classroom of his childhood, the stern but kind teacher who pushed him to dream. Without men like this, he would never have risen from poverty to lead a nation. Tears welled in the old man's blind eyes. His fingers fumbled for the empty bowl lying on the ground. His body shook as if the weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. "I do not need much," he said, his voice cracking. "Just enough to survive until tomorrow. Just enough to breathe one more day." Ibrahim reached out, and steadied the trembling hands. His own eyes glistened. His voice was low but firm, carrying a weight that silenced the entire crowd. "You have already given more than enough," Ibrahim said. "You gave children knowledge. You gave them hope. That is worth more than gold, more than money, more than power." The old man's lips parted his chest, heaving with sobs he had buried for years. Tears streaked down his face, cutting lines through the dust on his cheeks. For the first time, someone saw him not as a beggar, not as a burden, but as a man, a teacher, a father. The onlookers who moments before had mocked him now stood frozen in shame. Some lowered their heads. Others bit their lips, eyes wet. Mothers pulled their children closer, as if realizing the value of a teacher's hand. And in that charged silence, Ibrahim made a silent vow. He would not allow this man's story to end on a street corner, forgotten by the world. No, from this day forward, this story would change. For a long moment, Ibrahim stood in silence, staring at the frail figure before him. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, anger burning quietly beneath his calm exterior. A leader could not ignore this. A son of the soil could not walk away. He straightened his voice, sharp as steel. "Open the car," he ordered. The guards stiffened. One of them hesitated. "Excellency, please, it is not safe." "The crowd, the cameras," I said, "open it." Ibrahim's tone cut like a blade. The sound silenced not only his guards, but also the hundreds of eyes watching. Two men rushed forward, pulling the heavy door of the black SUV wide. Dust swirled around their boots. Ibrahim bent down his shadow, falling across the old man. Then, with a strength born not of muscle but of conviction, he slipped his arms beneath the fragile body and lifted him high. The old man gasped, startled. His cloudy eyes widened in disbelief. "No, my son, you mustn't. I am too heavy, too dirty," he whispered. Ibrahim's grip only tightened. His voice was steady, firm like the earth itself. "You once carried the future of this nation in your classroom. Today it is my turn to carry you." Gasps spread like waves through the crowd. Women covered their mouths, tears already streaming. Men shook their heads ashamed. Children pressed forward, their eyes wide with wonder. Step by step, Ibrahim carried the blind teacher across the hot pavement. His uniform grew dusty, sweat trickled down his temples, but his pace never faltered. The weight in his arms was feather-light, but the meaning was heavier than mountains. "Look," someone shouted. "The president is carrying a beggar." "No," another voice answered, trembling. "He is carrying a teacher." The crowd grew restless. Some wept openly. Others raised their phones higher. This was history unfolding before them, raw and unpolished. At the car, Ibrahim lowered the old man gently onto the leather seat. He adjusted the man's tattered clothes, brushing dust from his shoulder with a care that made the spectators' throats tighten. The old man clutched Ibrahim's wrist, his voice breaking. Why would you do this for me?" Ibrahim leaned closer, his eyes locked on the man's blind ones as though speaking directly to his soul. "Because a country that lets its teachers starve has already lost its soul. And I will not let that happen. Not while I breathe." For a heartbeat, the street was silent. Then a murmur swelled into cries. Some shouted blessings, others applauded. A woman collapsed to her knees whispering prayers. Even hardened men wiped their eyes. Ibrahim turned his voice booming, so all could hear. "Film this if you must. Let the world see. Let them see how we have treated those who gave us knowledge. Let them see what we became, and let them see that today it changes." The old man pressed his forehead weakly against Ibrahim's hand, sobbing. The crowd answered with claps, shouts, and prayers. The engine roared, and the convoy pulled away, leaving a trail of dust behind. But more powerful than the dust was what lingered in the air, Hope fragile but alive, reborn in the hearts of everyone who witnessed that moment. The convoy roared through the capital sirens, wailing until it skidded to a halt before the largest hospital in Ouagadougou. Nurses and staff looked up in shock as the door opened and President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out carrying the frail blind teacher in his arms. Gasps filled the courtyard. Cameras clicked. The weight of history walked through those gates. "Prepare a bed now," Ibrahim commanded. A nurse hurried forward stammering, "Excellency, I'm sorry, but we cannot admit him. He has no identification card, no health insurance, and the ward is already full." Ibrahim's eyes narrowed, his voice dangerously calm. "Are you telling me that this man who once taught our children must die in the street because of paperwork?" The nurse's lips trembled. It's hospital policy, sir." Ibrahim's chest heaved. He turned to the chief administrator, who had just rushed in, sweat dripping from his brow. "You," Ibrahim said, his tone sharp. "Where is your humanity?" The administrator cleared his throat nervously. "Excellency, you must understand. We are short on medicine, short on oxygen. Supplies are locked for emergency use only. My hands are tied." Ibrahim stepped forward, his boots striking the tile with thunder. He placed the old man gently on a bench, then slammed his hand on the administrator's desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Tied, Ibrahim's voice thundered, rattling the walls. "A nation that lets a teacher die because of locked cabinets is a nation already buried in shame." The room fell silent. Doctors froze mid-step, their eyes darting between the old man and their leader. Some looked away in guilt. Others clenched their fists, torn between duty and fear. "You speak of shortage," Ibrahim continued, his tone rising. "Yet I see shelves of medicine oxygen tanks sealed behind doors. Who gave you the right to choose who lives and who dies?" The administrator tried to answer, but his voice cracked. "These are protocols, Excellency. If we open the reserves, there will be chaos." Ibrahim leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "Chaos? No. The true chaos is a system that abandons its people. The true chaos is a teacher begging for rice in the street while files and stamps decide his fate." His voice grew sharper, faster each sentence like a blade. "If a child dies because his mother lacks insurance, that is chaos. If a man rots in pain because his name is missing from a form, that is chaos. And if a teacher dies because you refuse to open a cabinet, then you, naughty, are the disease of this nation." The administrator's knees buckled. Sweat rolled down his temples. Then from the corner, a doctor's voice trembled. "Excellency, I lost my own son 2 years ago. He couldn't get oxygen in time. I cannot watch another man die." The crowd turned. The doctor's hands shook, but his eyes burned with remembered grief. He stepped forward, pulling keys from his pocket. "I will open the storage." A murmur rippled through the staff. Some protested, others nodded, tears glistening. Ibrahim straightened, his voice now lower, but no less powerful. "Do it. And let it be known from this day in Burkina Faso, no teacher, no child, no parent will be denied life because of paper." With a trembling hand, the doctor unlocked the door. The hiss of air escaped as oxygen tanks rolled out, medicine boxes stacked high. Nurses rushed forward, preparing a bed. The old man was lifted gently, placed under care for the first time in years. Ibrahim exhaled slowly, his anger still burning, but his heart steady. He turned to the staff, his voice echoing, "Mark this day. We do not bury dignity with bureaucracy. Not anymore." The hospital courtyard erupted, not with applause, but with something heavier, silence, thick with shame and resolve. The air in the hospital room grew heavy with silence as nurses hurried to connect tubes, adjust pillows, and roll in an oxygen tank. The old man lay on the white sheets, his chest rising weakly. For years he had been treated like dust on the roadside. Now, for the first time in decades, he was treated like a life worth saving. Ibrahim stood at his side, watching every movement. The hiss of oxygen filled the room steady and rhythmic, as though the old man was being given back to life. His fingers twitched, then stilled. Slowly his breathing grew stronger. The doctors exchanged glances. One of them whispered almost in disbelief, "He is stabilizing." The old man's lips moved faintly. Ibrahim leaned closer, lowering his ear. "My son." The man whispered, his voice faint but steady. "I can breathe again." Ibrahim swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He clasped the man's hand tightly, his military grip trembling with emotion. "No, father," Ibrahim said softly. "It was you who kept breathing all along. Today we only gave you back the chance you always deserved." Tears streamed down the old man's face. His chest shook with sobs, yet his lips curved into the faintest smile. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Nurses dabbed their eyes discreetly. A doctor wiped his glasses, though they weren't fogged. Even guards at the door lowered their gaze, moved beyond words. Then, in a moment that would be remembered by all who stood there, Ibrahim knelt beside the bed. His voice broke deep and heavy with sincerity. "Thank you," he whispered, bowing his head. "Thank you for believing in me, even when the world forgot you." The old man's fingers traced Ibrahim's wrist, trembling but firm. "I taught letters, but I never thought one of my students would write history." The words pierced the silence. A sob escaped from one of the younger nurses. Another staff member covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Soon the entire room was filled with quiet weeping. And then it happened, one small act that shattered the weight of despair. The old man, with Ibrahim's help, sat up just enough to open his arms. Ibrahim leaned in, and the two embraced. The room erupted not in cheers, but in something more powerful. Applause mingled with tears. Nurses clapped, doctors bowed their heads, and even security guards wiped their faces. Some pressed their palms together in prayer. Others simply whispered, "Merci. Thank you. Alhamdulillah." At that moment, the hospital was no longer just a building. It became a sanctuary of hope. That night, after the blind teacher finally drifted into peaceful sleep, Ibrahim returned to the palace. But his heart was restless. The hospital scene replayed in his mind, the trembling voice, the locked cabinet, the shame in the eyes of those who stood powerless. He knew one rescue was not enough. This had to spark a movement. He summoned his ministers for an emergency meeting. They arrived in haste, their faces pale with unease. Some expected blame, others feared dismissal. Instead, they faced fire. Ibrahim rose from his seat, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Today, I carried a teacher from the street into a hospital, and I had to break through red tape to keep him alive. Tell me, what does that say about us?" No one answered. Silence pressed against the walls. "It says," Ibrahim thundered, "that our system has failed the very people it was built to serve. A teacher gave his life to our children, and we left him to beg for rice. This ends tonight." His fist struck the table. Papers leapt. Ministers flinched. From this moment, he declared, every retired teacher, every elder without family, every servant of this land will receive guaranteed care. No papers, no stamps, no bribes. Life is not a privilege, it is a right. A murmur spread. One minister raised a timid objection. "Excellency, the budget, enough." Ibrahim's glare froze him mid-sentence. "If we have money for weapons, we have money for bread. If we have funds for palaces, we have funds for medicine. Do not dare weigh lives against coins." His words crashed like thunder. Ministers shifted uncomfortably. Then, one by one, nodded. By dawn, a decree was signed. Emergency funds released. mobile clinics authorized, oxygen tanks and medicines unlocked for distribution. Trucks rumbled out of warehouses not carrying soldiers for war, but supplies for healing. That morning, citizens awoke to convoys bearing red crosses, not guns. Nurses waved from the backs of vehicles. Soldiers carried crates of medicine instead of rifles. Children clapped along the roads, chasing after the rumbling trucks. And in hushed voices across the capital, people whispered a new word: hope. Weeks later, the old teacher walked again, not with a cane, but with steady steps, guided by children holding his hands. His body was still fragile, but his spirit shone brighter than ever. Ibrahim visited quietly without cameras or banners. He found the man not in the hospital, but in a small classroom on the edge of town. The walls were cracked, the benches old, yet laughter filled the room. Dozens of children sat cross-legged on the floor, listening as the blind teacher's voice guided them through simple lessons. He could no longer write on a blackboard, but he taught through memory and song. The children repeated after him, their voices rising like a choir. Some traced letters in the dust, others counted with their fingers. In their eyes burned the same fire he once lit decades ago. Ibrahim watched from the doorway, his chest swelling. When the class ended, the old man turned toward the sound of footsteps. "Who is there? It is," Ibrahim said softly. The teacher smiled faintly. "My son? You came back." Ibrahim stepped forward, placing a small wrapped package in the man's hands. Inside was a set of books in Braille, specially printed so he could continue teaching. The old man's fingers brushed over the raised dots, trembling with emotion. "Years ago," Ibrahim said, his voice hushed, "you taught children to write the first letter of the alphabet. Today you write the first letter of hope?" The old man bowed his head, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. Around them, the children clapped, unaware they were witnessing history. That evening, as the sun set over the red horizon, the blind teacher sat with his students under the shade of a tree. His voice carried across the fields. Ibrahim stood at a distance, watching, knowing that this man's life was no longer a story of despair, but a living testament. Hope had not only returned, it had taken root. The evening sky burned with the last fire of the sun, streaks of gold and crimson melting into the horizon. In the village courtyard, children chased each other, their laughter echoing against cracked walls and dusty roads. And beneath the great neem tree, the blind teacher sat with his students, his wrinkled hands resting gently on their shoulders as he guided them with stories, songs, and memory. He could not see their faces, but he could feel their joy. Every giggle, every repeated lesson was proof that he was alive again, not just in body, but in purpose. From a distance, Ibrahim watched quietly. His uniform carried the dust of the road, but his eyes carried light. He did not interrupt, did not seek applause. He simply stood as witness to something far greater than himself, a man once forgotten, now reborn as the very heart of a community. When the class ended, the teacher lifted his face toward the sound of footsteps. "Who is there?" he asked softly. "It is I," Ibrahim replied, stepping forward. A faint smile appeared on the old man's lips. "My son, you came back." Ibrahim placed a package in his hands. Inside were Braille books crafted so he could continue teaching. The teacher's fingers trembled as they traced the raised dots, his sightless eyes glistening with tears. "Years ago," Ibrahim said gently, "you taught children the first letter of the alphabet. Today you teach us the first letter of hope." The old man lowered his head, overcome. Around them, villagers gathered, clapping softly, their eyes shimmering with gratitude. Children hugged the teacher's arms, chanting his name. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ibrahim turned to the people. His voice was steady, carrying across the quiet air. "Remember this day, A teacher is not a beggar. An elder is not a burden. Human dignity must never be left in the dust. The most beautiful inheritance we can leave behind is kindness. The crowd answered with tears, with nods, with whispered prayers. Some wept openly, others held their children tighter. And in that moment, the old man was no longer a beggar, no longer a forgotten shadow. He was once again a teacher, a father, a light. The camera of history closed on this scene, children laughing in the courtyard, a blind teacher smiling, and a leader standing at his side, not as a president above the people, but as a son among them. If this story moved, you comment 1 below. If not, comment 0. And don't forget to subscribe so we can share more stories of hope and humanity with the world.